Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, is worse than Candace Owens. Not just professionally, but as a human being. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. So we're going to talk about Fani Willis and what she's doing to rappers and to the Constitution, basically. There's 3 points I want to hit because there are people who are celebrating what she's doing in terms of not just indicting rappers, but of using their lyrics against them. What we're going to talk about is 3 things. We're going to talk about 1, why this is wrong legally, constitutionally. 2, why this is about accountability. And 3, why black folks especially should be paying attention because this is bigger than the so-called Pookies and Ray Rays. 1, legally. This is so blatantly unconstitutional. Fortunately, here in New York, and I don't even rock with the Democrats like that. But guess what? Jamal Bowman, who is a Democratic politician, advocated for and helped get passed legislation that put some limits on the government using rap lyrics against potential defendants. What this scumbag Fani Willis is talking about, oh, you shouldn't be rapping about your crimes then. Wait a minute. Do you have evidence? If you have evidence to support it, then the rapping is irrelevant. If the rapping is the evidence, that's bullshit. Because there's no reason to assume that they're being literal, that they're being factual, and that they're not just entertaining, that they're not just using words and using a medium to play a character, play a role, and create an image that they're selling musically. But constitutionally, here's why it's such a big problem. This is why it's such a big problem constitutionally. The First Amendment. And then there are people who say, oh, but if they're confessing, because listen, it's beyond confessing, because they're not just using these lyrics to say that, oh, this is evidence. They've actually been using these lyrics as counts, as criminal acts. They're treating speech. They're treating musical speech, musical expression as criminal acts in furtherance of criminal conspiracies. So they're saying by the act of rapping these lyrics, that is the crime. That is the criminal act that they're now using to create a nexus between these rappers and these alleged criminal organizations that they're claiming exist. And all I'm saying is that is such a blatant violation of the Constitution. It's funny because I was on one of lead attorney's panels and we were talking about this. And he's like, wait a minute, yeah. Because while he realizes it's not a smart thing, and I realize it's not a smart thing to openly confess to committing criminal acts. That's not a smart thing. There's a difference between using public confession as evidence and using that alleged confession as the criminal act itself. There is a huge difference. And that's what nobody is talking about. Nobody's talking about how this scumbag from Fulton County is actually trying to criminalize the speech of these young black men. Here's the point. If you're going to say, oh, no, well, if they shouldn't be, okay, if you're going to advocate for that, then tell me this. In the YSL case, why isn't Warner Media Company being held responsible? Because they're the parent label. So if you're going to sit here and say that just by speaking these words, it's a criminal act, by distributing these words, by pushing these words out to everybody else, that would be also in furtherance of this criminal conspiracy. Why aren't any of the music execs being charged? Because she knows she would get filleted. But she's doing it to young black men because she's like, nobody will care. And unfortunately, we got a lot of people in the black community that are so short-sighted that they don't see what this is, and they're going along with this. Which brings us to point 2, accountability. This is why this is about accountability. This isn't about the accountability to these young men that are making music that may be committing crimes, maybe, allegedly are committing crimes. Remember, this is the government talking. The government lies all the time. All the time the government lies. So just because the government says it when it's relating to a bunch of young black men doesn't make it true. Okay, but when we're talking about accountability, you know whose accountability we need to be talking about? The government's accountability, because the Constitution acts as a limit on government powers. So if we're not standing up and making sure that the government follows its own rules, and rules that in this case is the state government, and isn't adhering to the federal Constitution, which limits what a government can do, If we're not standing up for that, we're not holding the government accountable. And when the government is unaccountable, that's a bad thing for everyone. So all of the people out there who love talking about accountability, guess who else needs to be held accountable? The government. The government has to follow its rules. The government has to stay within the limits of its power. Just allowing the government to do whatever it wants to do doesn't work well and doesn't end well for any of us. Which brings us to point 3, how absolutely racist this is, how absolute, and why black people specifically should be, like, this should be a no-brainer for us. It's so utterly racist because they don't treat rap, hip hop, what we do, as art. They don't treat it as art. They just say it's nonsense, it's violence. They don't want to give it any artistic merit. It's interesting enough, I was watching Ari Melba break down the poetry of one of Jay-Z's latest verses. It is art. But there are so many in the mainstream society and scumbags like Fani Willis who consider herself one of the good ones. That's why I say she's worse than Candace Owens, because Candace Owens is widely reviled by the black community. But this clown, this scumbag, will pretend to be on black people's side, but the entire time she's D1, Democrat first. That's her allegiance. Her allegiance is to a party that has waged war against the black community since its inception. That's who she is. And so I look at this scumbag and she's using this anti-blackness as cover to be able to criminalize speech and artistic expression of young black men and to treat it as, no, it's not art. It's just, they're just thugs. They're just violent. They're just violent criminals and they don't deserve the benefit that everybody else in this country gets in the free expression of their ideas and their artistic merits. No, that doesn't apply to young black men. That's who this scumbag is. And I want you to remember this because right now I'm looking at her as being where Kamala Harris used to be. She's doing all this nonsense, making it clear who her allegiance is to, so that when the time comes, the Democratic Party can turn to her and say, yes, we anoint you to higher office. And I'm going to remember what a scumbag this bitch is, and I hope everybody else does. But let's get to the final point, the third point, how black people should not be falling for this nonsense. Like, how many times do we have to see the government create an entire separate standard that it applies to us? How many times do we have to see the government use a worst case scenario and then apply it to all of us, innocent or guilty? How many times do we have to realize that regardless of the fact that there may be some young black men that are engaged in horrible activities, as far as the government's concerned, we're all Pookies and Ray Rays. As far as these scumbags, these anti-black racists are concerned, we're all Pookies and Ray Rays by virtue of our skin color. So that's why I'm not even buying into that whole Pookie and Ray Ray nonsense, because listen, that's part of this programming from these scumbags who hate us anyway, and who constantly use the government as a tool to continue to wreak havoc within our communities. Because when their kids are doing stupid stuff, they start looking for reasons why the kids would do something like this. And what can we do to help them? What can we do to help these kids? What can we do to give them some better directions? But when it comes to us, you got scumbags like Joseph Biden on the Senate floor saying, I don't care how they got there. I'm at risk. My family's at risk, and I want them under the jail. That's what these scumbags actually believe. That's who these scumbags actually are. So no, black people should not be falling for this nonsense in 2022. We've seen it too many times, but too many of us either aren't aware of the history, haven't studied up on the history, or just aren't paying attention to the history. That's the bigger problem. The bigger problem is that too many of us just are still oblivious to the fact that there's a war going on and we're the target. At some point in time, we're going to have to wake up and realize, you know what? Nah, I'm not siding with the enemy who has been waging war against our people for hundreds of years. At some point, we got to wake up. I am personally looking forward to people gathering forces and getting this scumbag out of office, because she's got to go. And there's got to be an example made out of her. Her career has got to be torn down her career has got to be so thoroughly nuked and obliterated so that people do not continue to feel like that they can use the government to target us without reprisal. As always, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, like, share, subscribe if you have not subscribed already. And if you would like to see a video that I did on this subject before, you can click on the screen right here and find out some more details. I'll see you next time.